Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Gail Jensen. I'm the Dean of our graduate school and our College of Professional Studies here at Creighton University, also Vice Provost for Learning and Assessment. And it's my pleasure to say a few words of introduction here for our session today. As you know, this is National Public Health Week 2021, and our theme here is Building Bridges to Better Health. The American Public Health Association is the 26th year of a National Public Health Week. And do we need public health now more than ever? And this is a virtual week, April 5th through 11th. While we're physically distant from each other, as we know, it's more important now, more than ever, that we come together. And that fits with our theme of building bridges to better health. And we know that making our communities safe, getting people vaccinated and healthy is public health's top priority. COVID-19 has made this more important. We all know this. So even though we're not gathering in person, these virtual platforms, social media, make it possible for us to get together. Let me say just a few things about Creighton University. In our graduate school, we're very proud to have a public health program, an NPH program, and they went through their first steps with CEF accreditation, and they are hoping to receive their final decision in late August or early September. We had a very, very successful visit, so we're quite proud of that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce briefly here our director of our NPH program, Dr. D.T. Pradip. And I'll just call him Dr. T because DT because I have a hard time with his name. Just a couple of things about Dr. D.T. He's a professor in public health, full professor here at Creighton. And previously he had been at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. Also at Southern Illinois University, where he was graduate director, involved in an MD MPH program. And prior to that, he was also at the Medical School of Brown University. We were very, very fortunate to recruit him to Creighton to help us with the successful building of the program towards CEF accreditation. His research interests are in environmental health promotion and using risk communication approaches, as well as organizational behavior. Dr. D.T. received his PhD from the University of Utah and has completed several fellowships, including one from the Northeast Public Health Leadership Institute. So I'm going to turn it over to him right now. I'll be introducing the first speaker, but he has a few comments here to make about our session today. So DT?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jensen. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be part of this National Public Health Week. You know, our theme is, as Dr. Jensen mentioned, that is the building bridges to the better health. I'm so excited for our speaker and everyone that participate in National Public Health this week for the whole week. We beginning ours from Monday to Saturday, so we look forward to your participation. I just want to have 1 second here to mention about the format of our presentation here. After Dr. Jensen introduction, our guest speaker, our keynote speaker. So we will have Dr. Robbins' presentation about over half an hour, just a little bit, so that we will have time to answer some of the questions that we may have. So if we can hold some of the questions, to the end, that would be great. You may beginning to send some of the questions to the chat line. I will monitor some of those questions as time allows. I will try to pull out some of those questions and ask Dr. Robin. So thank you so much. We look forward to interact with you. Thank you, Dr. Jensen.
Yeah, thank you, DT. So let me make a few comments about Dr. Anthony G. Robbins. He's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, an Associate Professor of Biology, and Coordinator of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives, the School of Engineering, Math, and Science at Robert Morris University. His diversity officer role really encompasses dynamic and evolving planning for diversity inclusion strategies and initiatives and research, data collection and analysis, also developing university policies and initiatives in in line with existing knowledge, best practices in law, and serving as an internal and external boundary spanner. As you know, DEI work is so critical and so important in our current environment. Dr. Robbins holds a PhD in epidemiology from the University of Pittsburgh. He has a certificate in diversity and inclusion from Cornell University, and his professional training and development in epidemiology and health disparities has really given him unique opportunities to serve various roles in public health and academics, from health disparity epidemiologist at the Allegheny County Health Department in Pittsburgh, senior epidemiologist at the Center for Minority Health at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. And that's led to his current role. He's the chief diversity officer. He's also the epidemiologist in residence and associate professor of biology. He serves as a leader on all COVID-19 mitigation at his university. And he has more than 23 years of experience as an epidemiologist, an administrator, and a faculty in the Metro Pittsburgh area. We are really, really thrilled to have him with us today to do this kickoff keynote talk that he'll be doing. So please join me and welcome Dr. Robbins, who will be talking about the good enough place, envisioning a healthy urban habitat. Dr. Robbins.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen. Good morning. First, I would like to share my screen with you. So let's do that first, and then we'll get right into the presentation. Are you able to see my slides? Can I get a thumbs up from the team? Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for joining me as I share some thoughts about the good enough place, envisioning a healthy urban habitat. As a public health scientist like you, I often look at tables and lots of charts and lots of stats, especially when I'm listening to a presentation like the one I'm about to give. So I often want lots of that so that I can make some decision in my head about what next steps should be. But today, however, I want to do something a little different. Yes, I want to use a different strategy. Storytelling has been a powerful tool to help others to understand important concepts and principles. What I find interesting about this strategy is that it allows us to take difficult topics and conversations, provide a framework that helps the listener to hold on to the information as he replays or she replays the stories in their heads. Today, we're going to storytell. So don't worry. I promise it will be scholarly. However, what I need you to do for me, though, is I need you to keep as your backdrop the epidemiologic triad of host, agent, and environment. Disease, the stress, disruption is produced by exposure of a susceptible host to a noxious agent in the presence of environmental factors that aid or hinder agents of disease. Today, we will focus on the environment, place. So take a deep breath with me and enjoy the journey. And hold on here, next slide. There we go. Any good Pittsburgher knows how to give directions using long gone buildings and businesses as current landmarks. Yins goes down to the intersection where Kaufman's used to be, across from where Borders was, and turn right up past where the old school uniform store was, but don't go past Marketplace, because if you do that, you've gone too far. Now, if you're from around here, you know exactly what's being described and you'll get to where you're going, no problem. Pity, however, the poor non-Pittsburgher who has no historical context to follow such directions and who becomes even more at loss after receiving help. It's inevitable as time passes that our where it used to be method of giving directions will change as infrastructure and landscape changes. Old descriptors eventually become meaningless. That's how we define progress after all. Out with the old, in with the new. Deemed by Harlem Renaissance poet Claude McKay, the crossroads of the world, the Hill District of Pittsburgh was the core of Black culture. This slide shares a map of the city. The red oval that you see identifies the Hill District neighborhood, a segregated area populated by African Americans. This slide gives you a bird's eye view of how vibrant and rich the Hill District was in the 1940s. Wally Avenue is well known for its famous Crawford Grill #1, the seat of jazz in the city. You also see Harry's here and Joe Moneylon, and also there's Crystal Barbershop, where the who's who of Pittsburgh and beyond would meet. It was a place of information gathering and temperature check of the community. The Crawford Grill was a well-known place for jazz luminaries such as Art Blakey, Joan Coltrane, Errol Gardner, and Dizzy Gillespie to cool out and blow into the night for their peers, for each other to, or just for an appreciative group of fans and friends. The Hill was one of the most major stopping points for jazz musicians traveling between New York and Chicago. Concert halls dotted the neighborhood. Greenlee, the owner, aside from running a successful numbers operation, also owned one of the Negro League's finest teams. Yes, that's the Pittsburgh Crawfords. The Crawfords featured players such as Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, and maybe the greatest of all, Josh Gibson. In 1932, in the heart of the Hill, Greenlee built the first Black-owned and Black-built baseball park in America, called Greenlee Field. The Pittsburgh Courier was also found here in the Hill District, one of the most prominent Black newspapers of its time. The area, of course, proposed a special space for people, but it was also, because of its proximity and its accessibility downtown, it prospered. The Hill was dense. It was a lively place. This is important, and I need you to hold on to this because it is the rhetoric of urban renewal. This neighborhood was called a blighted slum that was a cancer in the city. And the only way to save the city was to destroy it. Yes, to literally wipe it off the face of the earth. To have this photographic evidence of this epic sense of life, where people are engaged with each other and creating community, helps to create a sense of how wrong the policy was. And there was ethnic diversity. Yes, it was stitched into the community's fabric. While a hub for African-American culture and commerce, it also was a place for the Jewish, Italian, and other communities to thrive. But that fabric began to unravel in the second half of the 20th century. Then came the 1950s. When we think about what we call now the Hill, it was once known as the Farm Number 3, owned by grandson William Penn and then sold to the Revolutionary War veteran. That farmland on the slopes nearest the city was purchased in the late 1840s by Thomas Mellon. He subdivided it into individual plots and flipped them for a profit, thereby beginning the Lower Hills development as a settled community. The area was filled with large homes and gracious estates in the early to mid-19th century. And at the same time, the region boasted of one of Pittsburgh's antebellum communities of free people of color known as Arthursville. Then came the 50s and 60s. Over 1,300 buildings were raised in the 1950s and 60s in the name of urban renewal. Roughly 80 blocks were cleared, 800 residents relocated to make way for the Pittsburgh Penguins Civic Arena, which itself was demolished in 2012. But even long after so many of those physical markers were destroyed, the history of the neighborhood, once the heart of Black cultural life in Pittsburgh, is far from forgotten. Credit, of course, for that rests with many, but the foremost among them is playwright August Wilson, author of the 1987 Pulitzer Prize-winning Fences, whose film adaptation was nominated for Best Picture at the 89th Academy Awards. The author of a 10-play series, none of that which are set in the Hill District, called The Pittsburgh Cycle, Wilson, who passed away at the age of 60 in 2005, introduced countless readers to the neighborhood, the Hill. When the Penguins Arena opened in 1961, it had not only uprooted an enormous part of the area's population, but it had cut the neighborhood off from many of its downtown access points. Streets that once ran right to the core of the city were suddenly dead ends. Not only was the neighborhood disconnected, but sometimes when people don't go to or through a place, they don't think about it. It is forgotten. Paired with the severe decline in the Pittsburgh steel industry, the Hill District could not recover. According to the Pittsburgh Department of City Planning, the population of the Hill District was roughly 31,000 in 1950. In 2020, it was less than 10,720. Of the group, 40% of the residents live below poverty level. 94% of the residents are African American. Urban renewal. Urban renewal is a comprehensive scheme to redress a complex of urban problems, including unsanitary, deficient, or obsolete housing, inadequate transportation, sanitation, and other services and facilities, haphazard land use, traffic congestions, and the sociological correlates of urban decay, such as crime. The American Housing Act of 1949, Title V of Public Law 81-171, authorized urban renewal, which was implemented over a 14-year period and carried out in 2,500 housing projects in 1,000 cities. 63% of the people who were relocated were African American. Just by simple ratio, that suggests that 1,600 urban renewal projects were directed at African American neighborhoods. Thereby, the Black community called urban renewal Negro removal. Negro removal. Pittsburgh Urban Renewal Plan was developed by white men. Looking at the picture, you can see that one, there are no women and definitely no Black people. These men represent the white power structure that labeled this epic civilization that existed in the Hill District as a blighted slum that was a cancer on the city, and they wiped it out. This is an example of white privilege thinking. Why? Because it is structural instead of psychological. And we tend to interpret most things in personal, individual, and psychological ways. Since they do not consciously have racist attitudes or overt racist behavior, they kindly judge themselves to be open-minded, liberal, and therefore surely not racist. Because they have never been on the other side, they largely do not recognize the structural access, the trust that they think they deserve, the assumption that they always belong and do not have to earn their belonging, the we set the tone mood that white folks live inside of and take totally for granted and even naturally deserved. Only the outsider can spot all of those attitudes in them. It's especially hidden in countries and groupings where white people are the majority. Edgar Kaufman, the head of Kaufman Department Store, loved opera and was looking for a site that the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera could use. The Lower Hill was identified as the prime area in which to build. It came to be called the Civic Arena, and it was finished in 1961 after the African American community was forced to move. After the arena was built, and not only was an entire section of the Hill District wiped out, but highways and parking lots were erected between the remaining African American community and downtown, sort of as a fortress to keep the people out. This slide shows Hill District residents being uprooted, moving to places unknown. The people were forced to move, experienced a traumatic stress reaction to losing all or part of their emotional ecosystem. These were profound and devastating experiences. People were losing their neighborhood. They were losing their neighbors. They were losing their businesses. They were losing their churches. They were losing their schools. They were having their whole lives uprooted, upended. They had to make new lives and manage huge emotional costs, economic costs, social costs, and political costs. All for progress? Here's what they received in the place of their neighborhood. A flying salsa-shaped, shiny steel dome arena, designed for opera with a retractable roof. Pittsburgh civic leaders originally conceived the Civic Arena as an indoor-outdoor venue to host musicals and concerts. Built on the slopes above the downtown, it was the centerpiece of a 100-acre cultural acropolis with concert halls, a museum, and a convention center. Sounds wonderful, right? But the Lower Hill District, a historic multi-ethnic melting pot neighborhood that was the center of a vibrant jazz scene, was completely demolished to make way for a higher culture, white culture. With urban renewal changing the density of social relationships, however, people did not know each other as well, and the dense networks started to break apart. Not only were people heartsick for their lost neighborhood, but without community monitoring of children, the children started to misbehave and other things started to fall apart too. One of the things that happened in the aftermath of the broader deindustrialization was the white workers had access to education that prepared them for work in scientific and technical fields. Pittsburgh rebuilt its economy on education and medicine, but African Americans were not able to access the education necessary to get into those fields, and they have basically been left behind, not only in the economy of Pittsburgh, but in the economies all across the United States. This investment led to the collapse and the abandonment of buildings. Neighborhoods like the Middle Hill illustrates the long-term ravages of bank redlining. These neighborhoods that, if not legally redlined, were at least paradigmically redlined. The narrative of disinvestment and petty-minded thinking is of not wanting to spend money for those people who were blamed for the conditions of slum neighborhoods. They were accused of not taking care of themselves, so why should the nation do it? The results of this investment was the destruction of social bonds and the loosening of strong family ties. Not only did families and churches fragment, but also the weak ties that carried across groups were disappearing. In the end, the social disintegration and fragmentation became universal. What is poorly understood about social disintegration is that not only were the so-called targeted neighborhoods destroyed, the functioning of the whole city was thrown into social disintegration, and fragmented networks of connection become characteristic of the larger place. The arc of the policies in the second half of the 20th century was the embodied habits of being in separate spaces, sorting people by race and class. Individuals may work with people different from themselves, but they do not socialize outside of work. People go back to segregated neighborhoods and do not live together and do not know each other. Therefore, people do not experience some place or something different, and this limits their capacity to think differently about the entire city. The city fathers of Pittsburgh bulldozed a community, destroying homes, stores, schools, and churches, and scattering the residents of the area to the four winds. It was called urban renewal and was billed as an effort to revitalize the city. But the residents of the Lower Hill lived a different reality. They suffered an enormous loss, one that could never be repaired. The complex and intangible entity called community existed in the connections among human beings, but depended on the matrix of buildings to give them form and substance. To put it another way, one does not simply have a friend. One has a friend that lives just down the street or just down the block. One does not simply say hello to the news vendor. One says hello to the news vendor in passing the newsstand on the way to work. It is this specificity of connections that is almost always overlooked in thinking about renewal. Interpersonal connections are not generic linkages like plumber's tubing. Rather, they depend on the repetition of specific crossings situated in very particular life spaces. In the aftermath of displacement, people suffer terribly. I have come to think of these three major categories of loss that people routinely describe. The displaced are disoriented. The landmarks guided them almost unconsciously are now gone, and they must renegotiate everything from groceries to shoe repair. The displaced are nostalgic for the past. They remember the way things used to be, and they long for that way of being. The neon lights, the street signs, the places to go, all that has disappeared is now mourned. This mourning takes place on a particular character because many of the people survive it. It's often, we often think it's quite silly or it seems simple to sweat the small stuff. At least we have each other, people say. It seems somehow trivial and illegitimate to miss your corner store or even that shoe shine boy. In fact, it is in order to understand the magnitude and meaning of the loss, we must recast our understanding of what is lost as not simply a house or store, but rather the whole net of living, the matrix of interdependence that made life possible and joyous in a particular place at a particular time. In the aftermath of the dozers, this is difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild. Finally, the displaced or alienated. The fact that the outsiders could have taken their homes and their land, and the lands of the insider, makes outsiders a species of enemy. It creates a rupture between those of us here and those over there. Displacement creates a profound sense of suspicion that lingers and colors later relationships. They did that. What will they do next? Is the question that always hangs in the air. Now, while the first part of our talk today was about the problem of the contested territory, the second half will investigate the concept of good enough place. Finally, we're going to tie it all together to get an understanding of what is meant by healthy habitat. So let's get started with place attachment. Place attachment is the emotional bond between person and place. It is highly influenced by an individual and his or her personal experiences. What makes a place meaningful enough for a place attachment to occur? Well, meaning is the thoughts, the feelings, the memories, and the interpretations invoked by landscape. And preference is the degree of lacking for one's landscape compared to another. Place attachment is multidimensional and cannot be explained simply through a cause and effect relationship. Instead, it depends on a reciprocal relationship between behavior and experiences. A noteworthy conceptual framework defines the variable of place attachment as the 3 Ps, that is person, process, and place. When describing place attachment, we must differentiate between a rootedness and a sense of place. Sense of place attachment arises as the result of cultivation of meaning and artifacts associated with created place. Due to constant migration over the past few centuries, Americans are thought to most commonly have this type of place attachment as they have not stayed in a place long enough to develop storied roots. Rootedness, on the other hand, is an unconscious attachment to a place due to familiarity achieved through continuous residence, perhaps that of a familiar lineage that has known this place in the years before the current resident. Big Mama's house, for example. The focus on the relative contribution of different dimensions of place, meaning it implies a duality between individuals, culture, and the environment in the human nature relationship assessments, and stifles discussions on a more holistic concept of relatedness. Absence in most discussions is the way in which a sense of place is formed based on the nature of the setting, the kind amount of experience with that setting, and the social demographic characteristics of the individual. The concept of situated cognition is one way to understand such relatedness of the conjoining of people and place. By situated cognition, we refer to how meaningful actions are spatially and temporally located, i.e. situated alongside socially and culturally constructed meaning. Through direct perception and action, we create various forms of perceived place meanings related to functional, social, or symbolic elements of a given area. Meanings are assigned to places within one's immediately perceivable environment. These places have clear material and perceptual components. Perception, action process, and associated cognitions always occur in a situation. Because perception is direct, meaningful actions are always spatially and temporally located, providing information about here, there, me, and now. Information perceivable in any given situations will specify patterns of relations between the organism and the environment. Situations can then have motivating qualities, as in the case of a low ledge for the children as a climbing space. Thus, patterns at any given situation not only offers the opportunity to act, but also can invite and attract the action or repel and detract the action. Any given place can therefore have an array of positive and negative affordances that promote or inhibit action, respectively. Sense of place rarely accounts for sensory or immediately perceived meanings. It pays little attention to how place meanings are, and it assumes that the relationship between the places attached to behavior is not necessarily linear. One of my favorite places to go as a little boy was a big white house that sat in the middle of the neighborhood. It was the Miller's house. It had a large porch that seemed to stretch forever. And there, I met my friends. Yes, we played games, we sat and we talked about things. It was the gathering place, a happy place filled with smiles and belly-rolling laughter. For many of us, it was there that we made plans and dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, stuntmen, astronauts, lawyers, and movie stars. The porch was where we sat and ate cool watermelon and let the sweet juices just run down our faces. Miss Miller would tell us stories or teach us a new game. We would spend hours there. Often we would have to be beckoned home by our mothers who thought, well, we had well spent our time. It was a safe place that welcomed all children of the neighborhood. When Mr. Miller enclosed the porch and remodeled the house, giving it a more contemporary look, something happened. The children stopped coming. They did not gather at the Miller's house anymore. Friends who lived in the opposite directions of the Millers, who once met on the porch, did not meet anymore. New social groups formed as a result. Because these groups did not mingle, suspicion and distrust were engendered. Friends became estranged. The strangest part is that no one understood at the time what was happening, yet everyone knew that they were experiencing some phenomena that was unpleasant and uncomfortable. No one gave language to their feelings. We went on with our lives as if the porch never existed. As time went on, I found other places to play and hang out. I would never feel the same about the Miller's porch, although I couldn't explain why. These feelings would be buried deep within me, not to erupt until years later, almost 2 decades later, and hundreds of miles away from the Miller's concrete porch. The strangest thing happened during a teach-in on the configuration of space and its relationship to emotions. Those feelings I experienced as a child surfaced. However, this time I was able to give language to what I felt about the porch. I was able to understand that when Mr. Miller changed the structure of the house, he changed the function. The house no longer welcomed the children. The renovation served as a wall that hindered their coming over to visit. More importantly, I learned that to every space is attached some emotion. When the porch was taken away, the children experienced, unbeknownst to them, grief as if they had lost a loved one. The happy place, my happy place, became a place of sadness. The psychology of place suggests that specific attributes of place will affect human actions and interactions within their boundaries. A good enough place will facilitate healthy actions, while a toxic place will act in the opposite manner. Good enough is a concept put forward by psychiatrist Donald Winnicott, who observed that infants did not need perfect mothers, and lucky for us, as perfection is impossible, but they did need a minimum level of nurturance, attention, and love. Mothers had to be, in his words, good enough. Similarly, places must fulfill basic sustenance needs for human beings, and therefore must be good enough to support life. The question then becomes, what does that entail? A good enough place has a center and a boundary. A good enough place is a place where people want to be. They are drawn there by a kind of magnetic force that pulls people towards the place. The places with the strongest power of attraction have a central focus that pulls people in. For example, a well-designed neighborhood will have a town square that draws people to the center. Conversely, at the end of the place, there is a boundary. This boundary is essential, as it defines the in and the out, giving it its essential interiority. Almost everything about human interaction is based on the tension between interior and exterior. A good enough place makes sense to the people within it. Places are organized according to culturally derived rules. Assuming that places follow the rules, people within the place know how to use what is there. But sometimes the rules are violated, and this can be distressing and disorienting. A good enough place provides physical sustenance. It is obviously important that people get all sorts of environmental sustenance. People need food. People need sunshine, exercise, clean air, shelter from the elements, and protection from the predators. People must also rid the environment of toxic substances, such as waste and other poisons. A good enough place provides essential support. Life in all of its incomprehensibility is stressful for human beings. It is essential that they have support in managing the incomprehensible. Thus, religious institutions, cultural events, and other activities are essential to managing the joy, the wonder, suffering, and other hard parts of the human condition. A good enough place is linked to other places. For many reasons, not least of which is curiosity and a wish for variety, people cannot be confined to a single place. Rather, they need to be able to travel, visit, immigrate, explore, pioneer, vacation, and otherwise investigate the wonders of the earth. In order for this to happen, places need to be linked to each other. In earlier centuries, places were sufficiently isolated that it was possible that for one place to exist independent of the other. That is no longer the case. The corollary of places being linked is that places are mutually interdependent, not independent, interdependent. A good enough place respects the rights and needs of other places. In sum, good enough places work for the people within and do not harm the people without. A good enough place is a healthy habitat. But what do we mean by that? A healthy habitat is that intersection of a healthy society, healthy environment, and healthy people. By healthy society, we're talking about a safe community, healthy economy, welcoming and inclusive community, social connectiveness, age-friendly and youth-friendly communities, an engaged community. Healthy environments include quality housing, healthy and sustainable food system, a sustainable natural environment, a community design that meets residents' needs, smart transportation networks, access to green spaces. Lastly, healthy people include having adequate income, mental well-being, healthy working conditions, healthy eating, access to health and social services, education, lifelong learning, childcare, active living, and intervention and rehabilitative services to include substance use and tobacco reduction. What are some critical issues that often are left out of the conversation that should be considered when creating a healthy habitat? Creating a strong street facade. First, it is essential to guard the corners of the streets and the avenues. The houses and stores on these corners have a particularly powerful influence on a community. Strong, well-designed corners protect the immediate spaces and create an attractive vista. Second, it is important to keep the variety of house facades, as this variety gives depth and appeal to the streetscape. Uniform, unvarying design is virtually deadening and distracts from the public space. Personalized units in the housing projects. Yes, some of the units in the housing projects have gardens or are personalized in other ways. This is an important way in which people put a stamp on the things that they value about the places that they occupy. This tradition is very important in creating a sense of ownership and creating an interesting public space. It should be encouraged as a way of creating a sense of belonging, a sense of community, and a sense that one's neighborhood is worth protecting and maintaining. Separate the houses from the street. Some houses have stairs intruding the street without the protection of a front yard. Space to enclose these house fronts can be created by widening the sidewall and narrowing the street. It is important to understand that there is a need to separate the personal space that is created by one's home from the public spaces that are created by sidewalks, streets, and avenues. Create market centers. One feature of urban life that gives neighborhoods great vitality is the presence of strong market centers. These centers offer products that are unique creations of the community's artists and artisans and should be created at various points throughout the neighborhood. Attract people from around the world. Successful neighborhoods attract people from around the world, all around the world. They are drawn there for specific kinds of things like the presence of a stadium, a museum, or a particular kind of shopping. What is it that would bring people to the neighborhood? Finding and developing this attraction will create a momentum essential to the area's renaissance. In conclusion, the Hill, or Little Harlem, as it was referred to from the 30s through the 50s, was one of the elite African-American neighborhoods in America. It was the home of the most vibrant jazz scenes in the country, as well as one of its hottest clubs, the Crawford Grill. In America, prior to mass suburbanization and sprawl, our great cities served as not only cultural and business hubs, but thriving centers of families. Some of those neighborhoods were virtually cities within cities, especially when it comes to divisions of ethnicity and color. These places had their own histories, their own sports and entertainment culture, and in some cases, even their own language. But as people fled the old urban centers, many of these areas fell into decay and many lost the proud identity they once had maintained. Rarely has one of these cities within a city been mourned as the Pittsburgh Hill District. Today, much of the hill that exists is gone, erased by the wrecking ball and pure decay. In its place stand empty lots, decaying homes, the occasional jitney stand, a few remaining struggling businesses, and the specter of a storied past. As one of the first cities, yes, one of the first cities in the United States to implement a large urban renewal project, the city fathers destroyed a significant neighborhood and dislocated thousands of people. Movements were always afoot to aid the neighborhood to restore some of its cultural glory, but those plans rarely took hold for any length of time. Once a vibrant, healthy habitat, the current hill pales in comparison to its distant past. The urban renewal effort depleted the neighborhood of its rich resources. Its main arteries were severed. The neighborhood was left to bleed to death. The critical intersections of a healthy society, healthy environment, and healthy people are non-existent. For example, per capita, there are very few businesses or banks, which speaks to, of course, the unhealthy economy. Limited neighborhood healthcare facility, high crime. There's lots of drug use, trafficking, and violent crimes, so it's not a safe neighborhood. No local grocery stores or farmers markets, so there's a food desert. No healthy and sustainable food system in place. Insufficient, that is, number of community centers. No dine-in restaurants, just to name a few. There is no definitive singular answer for what the people in the community and outside interests should do. However, as the planning for the Hill District moves forward, there is one thing that remains crystal clear. No one can forget the past. When all of the plans are on the table, the residents, the planners, the providers, and all Pittsburghers, what they need to remember is what was done to the Hill District, that the focus was on development solely, not the people. People were lost. A community was lost. Memories were lost. Hence, our goal should be not to repeat the past. This can happen in any of our great cities. I carry away the sad realization that not one, but many African-American communities were destroyed by misguided urban renewal efforts in the 1960s, a style of urban management that haunts present-day plans. I also carry away memories of the citizens' love for their neighborhoods and their cities. We have much to do to revitalize American cities. It takes many kinds of structures to make a neighborhood. We live not just in houses, but in the urban habitat of churches, jitney stations, green areas, corner stores, subsidized housing, barbershops, and so many other spaces that makes up what we call healthy habitat. We can compose a healthy habitat by knowing what we need and what we like, keeping in mind always the congruence between situations and configurations. Thank you.
Dr. Robbins, wow. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and the talk that you give to us. So this is the, what a timely needed for our country to hear these talks. You have absolutely highlighted many important issues related to the public health functions, that involving with the boundary of places, built environment, and social connections. I would like to welcome, the audience questions. I like to maybe, opening some of this dialogue, and we appreciate. So please send the chat, or even you want to ask, my first question to you, Dr. Robin, as you're talking about the engaging in all the community, when and how to engage to ensure the community impacted by the proposed changes have voice in the process. As you are aware that it is challenging to get everyone on board with the future plan. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Ratnapajib. I appreciate the question. It's a very important one. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to our communities, communities where people, underrepresented minorities are finding themselves being the largest part of that particular population. Oftentimes, we get the impression that things are done to us because we're never invited to the initial planning, right? We never are invited to sit at the big table to share what our needs are. And so there's always someone from the outside that is deciding what those needs are and what should be addressed. So it is important that we are brought in day one, even in precursory stages, when you're even thinking about change, before you even get to the place of concepts and places of thinking about, well, next moves, that we should be a part of that. But it's important that we do a needs assessment. I think that's a critical tool that we as public health practitioners are very familiar with, that we need to do a needs assessment, get the people's voices captured and the needs, of course, documented. And then, of course, collectively with in partnership with the community, begin to then develop a plan to how best to address those needs. While you might think, coming from the outside, that we need a new street, it may be something else that's more valuable to the community at that time, and that will lead for more healthier outcomes because you're addressing that critical need. So getting us there, assessing and beginning, getting our voices, right, hearing us, listening, and then working collectively, we can then move forward to a healthier situation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for answer this question. I think it's very important. Absolutely. There is time, if the audience has a question, please, I would like to welcome everyone. We have some time, please. You can either send the chat to me or question, please.
So I have a comment, not so much a question, but thank you for pointing out the importance of connectivity and roadway infrastructure in terms of defining communities and in terms of accessing communities. It was very common, as you indicated, during the urban planning and renewal to put in highways that actually cut off communities, literally physically cut off communities from being able to access. And I think that's an often overlooked point.
Thank you very much for that comment. I agree. It is often overlooked. And, they brought in these plans thinking that they're going to create better routes to move about. But if you really think about it, oftentimes what they did was they went around our neighborhoods, around those neighborhoods, so that we were actually isolated. So we became those people over there as opposed to part of the larger community. That also severed our ties from those resources that were critical to our survival as well. So you're now, of course, having to find other ways to get to a market, other ways of now getting to the doctors, other ways of getting to those things that are important to our survival. So it wasn't just a way of just they're now creating this really lovely, passageway or this nice network of highways and byways, but it was also their way of strategically separating the masses. And I know that oftentimes we get very uncomfortable when we think about that, but the evidence speaks largely to that, because there was no, afterthought about, well, what can we do to help now that we've done this thing? Yes, that plan wasn't a good plan. So what do we do now to help, to rectify? They just kind of left those communities alone and they went on as if they didn't exist. So that says to me that those efforts were intentional and they never meant to do anything but what they did at that time.
Thank you. I got a comment here from the chat, from Dr. Costanzo mentioned about that, quite a few times where, with the plan, how often the public health representative were involved, even on the committee. Sometimes we need to have representation on that. I think that is very critical, that we all need to be on board on that.
Very good question. If you go back to that picture that I showed very early on, when I actually showed Allegheny Conference and those men that actually decided what urban renewal would look like for that particular part of us, that part of our city, there was not a representative from the Allegheny County Health Department, or there was not an official from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, or even from our national level, the Centers for Disease Control. Those individuals were not part of that conversation. At least it's not documented that they were. Now, I can't say that they did not reach out, because I was not privy to those types of conversations and what happened in the back rooms or the conference rooms, but I can say publicly, they were not visible, and that speaks volumes.
Okay, thank you. I understand the intention, growth, it happened, but how do we know that growth is what we need, and if we need, how do we make sure that the culturally and pieces and all those things? I have the question from the audience, if I may read it to you. There is a movement to increase urban agriculture in urban communities. How do you think we should proceed with urban planning to develop policy to support the ability for communities to plan and engage in their own food system planning? Please.
Thank you for the question. I think one, going back to something that was said earlier, and the question about, well, were the public health practitioner or the public health person, or were we there? I think to answer this question, that's a critical player. We have to be a part of everything that's going on. We can no longer sit on the side and watch and be onlookers. We need to be a part of the conversation and the movement. It's important, again, as I go back to my earlier comments, that we embrace the needs and what the community is actually saying. Please listen, right? We need to go in, not with a what I can do to you attitude, but more how can we partner? That's the key. I think it's changing that mindset, right? A lot of us who are in academia, we have built libraries based upon what we've done to these communities. You know that, right? All the research that we've done. But yet a lot of us, I'm not saying your institution, but a lot of us have been guilty of not going back to partner, to be there to help, right? To help them move to a safer and a healthier type situation. And I think in this regards here, it is our responsibility. We should make it not only our responsibility, but it is what we should think of as our honor to be able to give back, right? Our way of helping these communities, our communities, to thrive. So not only being a part of the planning process, but also a part of the implementation as well, to be there. But I think it's important also, something that we don't talk about a lot of times is that we don't ask the community, we just kind of go and show up. And I think we need to get permission, right? You know, we need to honor the elders of that community. We need to honor, you know, the practices of that community. We need to honor the culture, and we need to go in and embrace it. But we need also to uplift it, to understand before trying to change. Oftentimes we want to change something because from our mind's eye, it seems inappropriate. It seems unhealthy. It seems not to be the thing to do. But we're taking that perspective because we don't have all the information. So it's important to go in to understand first, right? Live among the people, get to understand, right? And then together, let's make the change.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes, please. If any question. You know, I'd like to connect these, you know, to the public health a little bit in, you know, as we do here, public health, what we do is prevention, as you agree that, you know, we're talking about chronic disease, infected disease. And you also mentioned about the food research, you know, because that is so important. When we're talking about food, we're talking about the culture, we're talking about education, we're talking about ethnicity and all these things, you know, because in food, as you're aware, we're talking about obesity, heart disease, cancer, and all those things. Could you comment that, you know, once we move that to the, you know, once the city or the urban planning, you know, all these things, how do we make sure that the public health piece, the chronic disease, the prevention, and all those things will be integrated into that plan, you know?
It's important that we consider all those things that are necessary for our healthy survival, right? And critical to that is having access to good food, healthy food sources. When there is no market in the neighborhood and you're depending on mom and pop type situations where a lot of times the food that's available there are just going to be those things that as we know, consumption of those type foods over time lead to challenges, right? They're high in sodium, they have lots of sugar, they're processed because they're those things that are going to be packaged so that they can be, they can last longer in those spaces. So you're not going to get a lot of that fresh produce and those things that are going to help us to thrive and be our healthier selves. So because of that, you're now sitting about a situation where without this food source or healthy food source in place, where people are now depending on what they can get. And so those things now are going to allow them to find themselves in those at the risk for those unhealthy spaces, like dealing with challenges like diabetes and mellitus, or dealing with hypertension and those type things. Also, keep in mind, when you don't have the necessary transit system in place, or transportation system in place to help them to get to the other spaces that they can find those things, that's going to be a problem too. Now, think about this, okay? So here I am, a parent that's trying to take care of my family, and I need to go out and provide food for that family. I don't have a market in my neighborhood, so I need to now leave to go to another neighborhood to get that food. But I have to have a way to get there, right? So if I'm going to take the bus system, there's only but so much I can bring back with me, you know, on a bus. Let's be honest about that. And the chances are that I'm not going to be able to afford a taxi. And depending on where I am, there may be or may not be an Uber or, you know, a Lyft type situation. So how do I get the necessary foods to provide for my family? Healthy foods. Then if my family members are compromised, how then do I get them the care that they need to deal with those challenges that were brought on because of this food desert, brought on because of lack of resources? What do I do then? So when we think about planning, right, when we think about urban planning, we have to think about what's necessary for a healthy neighborhood, right? It's not just pretty buildings, right? It's more than that. And that in the physical space is very important. I don't want to say anything that against that piece, but you got to understand that it's more involved, and we have to think holistically. And it's important that we as public health practitioners advocate that we also for these things and that we're there, part of that conversation. We got to push, 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 and continue to push because we've set back, and I'm not blaming you, but I'm just saying we as the bigger we have just set back and let things happen. And it's now time that we stand up for us. We are about public health, the health of the people. It's now time we stand up for the people. And by the way, you're part of the people. So when our friends and our colleagues and our family members are compromised, you're also impacted and you pay a cost too. So don't think that we get away free because we can go and hide in our nice buildings and nice homes in our little safe neighborhoods. We are also impacted. There's one earth, only one. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your response, and then this presentation is absolutely. I would like to wrap up this presentation from our keynote speaker, Dr. Anthony G. Robbins. Thank you so much from the bottom of our heart. And we have the National Public Health Weeks throughout the week until Saturday. Please check with our website. And if anyone else have the question, please email me and our team. And thank you so much and have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.